Next up, we're going to play our interview with Becky Scott. So Becky Scott, if you don't know her, is Canadian. She's in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. She's a three-time Olympian. She won gold at the Sochi Games, but unfortunately for her, she's one of these athletes, cross-country skier, that initially won bronze and then she was upgraded to gold. Initially silver and then ultimately gold after maybe 2 years. The two competitors ahead of her tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. Now, you might be surprised to hear then at that point she got involved with WADA. These days she's chair of WADA's Athlete Commission, and she'll tell us more about the Athlete Commission. And she made headlines last September. So as well as being involved with WADA's Athlete Commission, she had also been the chair of the WADA Compliance Review Committee. So she stepped down from that position after WADA reinstated Russia back towards the back end of last year. And it's been very messy as well. What seemed to happen out in the Seychelles is that she made a presentation to the WADA Executive Committee, a 12-person committee, about Russia, about why the Compliance Review Committee didn't think it was a good idea, or why certainly she didn't think it was a good idea. The Compliance Review Committee passed it, but she wanted to put an athlete's voice forward. Anyway, there were allegations of bullying there, that there were inappropriate comments and gestures from some members of WADA's Executive Committee during the meeting, during her presentation. That was last September, so it was all very messy and undignified. And as we found out earlier on when we were talking to her, it's not really something she's free to talk about in any great detail. There seems to be internal investigations ongoing, although interestingly, they don't seem to be talking to her as part of the investigation. So make of that what you will. Anyway, that's her general story. She popped in earlier on. You'll hear why she's over in Ireland. So here's Becky Scott.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You're in Dublin today. The reason for your visit is I think you were helping launch the Team Ireland Athletes Commission plans. They're going to have 3 workshops over the next 9 months to work with athletes and educate athletes and high performance directors.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good, sensible thing to do.
It sounds like a great thing to do, and I'm really pleased and encouraged to see the Team Ireland Athletes Commission coming out with this news and the project that they're embarking on. I think it's really indicative of a new surge in athlete voices and athlete representation being actively working within sport to make it a better place and to help shape and guide it. So I'm quite impressed with the Team Ireland Athletes Commission.
Good. In some ways it's surprising really down the years and down the decades that athletes haven't been to the fore more.
It is, but nevertheless it's encouraging and good to see that it's happening now. I think the time is right.
Do you think it's happening because they are just so utterly frustrated with what's happened over the last 2 decades?
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you're chair of the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, the WADA Athlete Committee. What exactly does that committee do? Who's on it? What powers does it have?
Yeah, so it's a standing committee within WADA, and it's 15 people across the spectrum of sport and signatories that are subject to the code. So it's Olympic, Paralympic, non-Olympic, etc. Across all nations and everyone really who's subject to anti-doping policies and procedures that are monitored by WADA. Our role and our real primary objective is to bring the voice of the athletes, the perspectives, the concerns, the issues, the opinions, and also present positions on different policies and decisions that WADA is making. So we're there to really represent the athletes, who are the constituents, the number one stakeholder that WADA is serving.
And has it been frustrating for you or for athletes generally that the athlete voices have been completely ignored by WADA in the reinstatement of Russia?
That was
Let's be blunt about it. Yeah, it was good. I mean, ignored is the word.
Yeah, effectively ignored.
I didn't see a single clean athlete say this is a good idea. Not one.
Not any that we heard from.
Yeah. You're a little bit compromised here. Compromise is the wrong word, but you can't actually talk about your resignation from the chair of the WADA Compliance Review Committee in any great detail.
I mean, I can speak to why I did it.
Sure.
And it was on principle, but...
For people who aren't fully aware of what happened, so look, everybody's aware of the Russian doping situation and the extent to which, I think 99% was the last estimate we had of Russian athletes were doping. The current KGB were involved. There were tunnels. It was all very John le Carré-esque. We're all familiar with that. And WADA had mapped out a route back for Russia, a roadmap, certain criteria they had to hit, and it seemed that certainly 2 of the criteria were changed or ignored or there was room for flexibility. Back towards September in Seychelles, the executive committee met. There was a 12-person executive WADA committee. They met. You made a presentation to the committee, I would presume to the effect that it was not the right time to reinstate Russia, and this was ignored, and you resigned on principle.
I had resigned actually prior to that meeting from the Compliance Review Committee, of which had made the recommendation to reinstate RUSADA.
Okay, so the review committee made the recommendation and you resigned.
They made the recommendation, and then it's the executive committee that actually makes the decision, and I'm not a member of the executive committee, although I was there as the chair of the WADA Athlete Committee. Okay,
so you made a presentation to the executive committee as to why Russia shouldn't be allowed back.
I made a presentation on the views of the athletes that we had heard from, and the position that was the position of the WADA Athlete Committee.
Mm-hmm. Where I think you can't go into more detail around the claims of bullying in effect, but the atmosphere in the room seems like it was not good.
You're right, I can't really go into much more about that.
Okay.
It's ongoing.
Okay. Well, where is that ongoing? Is that an internal investigation, or is it in the courts?
It's just ongoing.
Oh, really? You can't say anything about it?
I'm really not, yeah.
Okay. Was Craig Reedy in the room? He's on the executive committee.
He's the chair, he's the president, yes.
So, I mean, did he step in when your presentation was being laughed at?
You know what, I prefer not to speak about it.
Picking up in the picture. Yeah. Okay. So Russia are reinstated. Like, nobody has any faith in WADA. Like, let's talk bluntly. That's where we are. I can read out, tons of quotes here on pages in front of me from different athletes, from different people who have worked for WADA. I think it's the reason that athletes are coming to the fore now. The work that you're doing, the global athlete movement is a new movement where athletes are starting to try and get involved. For instance, Ed Moses, chairman of the USADA, US Anti-Doping Agency, he's a two-time Olympic gold medalist. He said the time is needed for drastic action. For instance, he's talked about the way that WADA is governed. Like, WADA is funded by the Olympic Council.
The IOC, the sport movement.
Yeah. That doesn't seem...
Half of it, yeah.
Yeah, and governments of the world.
Yes, yes.
For instance, that doesn't seem like a great arrangement to me.
Well, I mean, you could argue certainly that there needs to be more independence within the governance, and it would be best practice to bring in more independence. And so WADA has actually undergone a review of their governance over the last 2 years. And the summary of the recommendations that came out of that review were for more independence, but in the view of the athletes it wasn't enough, and we were really pushing for increased athlete representation as well that would come out of this working group on representation, and that didn't happen. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of the governance. Why
were you so against the reinstatement of Russia to the extent that you resigned on principle?
It was a couple of reasons, fundamentally because WADA is really there to serve athletes. Like, in many ways, a sport is not anything without athletes.
Sure.
And so this whole structure has been set up to police and regulate doping in sport and cheating in sport, and to create a level playing field for athletes. And that has been accomplished through, very strict liability, very high expectations, very strong standards that have been established for athletes to meet. And there's no flexibility, there's no room for maneuvering, there are, certainly there's cases that come and go that are questionable, but by and large athletes are held to a very strict standard of accountability and expectations to play by the rules, which are there effectively to protect the integrity of sport. Recently, a number of years ago, WADA introduced a standard of compliance for signatories, which are the people that are, imposing the rules on, and the ADOs, the IFs, the sporting body administrators, and the idea was to hold them to a similar standard. And we felt that in the face of such scale of such corruption and doping fraud and cheating that had been confirmed and exposed, that there should have been a very high level of expectation required before compliance was reinstated. And there was a roadmap, it was established, there was conditions that were set. and then they were changed. And as the athlete committee and as, you know, the hearing from the athlete community, there was just a general feeling of that's really unfair. That is really unfair and unjust. And what is the message that's being sent here? So that was the reason.
And what was the message? I'd be curious for your wording on the message that was sent.
I think the message sent was that there is a different standard, and that was clear, you know. And I understand the reasons that we were given, and I can appreciate that. But at the same time, I think if you have a principle, you stand by that principle.
Because Craig Reedy said about the decision, he said WADA would never make a decision based on money over principle. And he said, we have an independent compliance review committee and they wouldn't take a decision like that. Completely ignoring the fact that you resigned from that committee on principle. So, you know, this is like the muddying of the waters. If somebody is following this casually and they see a statement like that from Reedy where he says, WADA would never make a decision based on money over principle. We have an independent compliance review committee and they would not take a decision like that. I mean, he fails to mention that the chair of it resigned. This is unacceptable. This is crazy. It's a crazy way for WADA to behave.
I mean, it was surprising. There's no question.
Were you genuinely surprised?
When it happened, I was genuinely surprised by the recommendation. I was not genuinely surprised by the decision that was taken afterwards. After the recommendation was made, it seemed like that was the direction everything was going and leading to. But it just felt like, as athletes, we had been hearing for 2 years that there was this conditions, this roadmap that was being adhered to, and that wasn't going to change. That was going to be unwavering, and we believed it. And
there were 2 points, I think, which were softened. And now, again, it wasn't like that was announced. I think that was exposed in the media as opposed to a transparent announcement that we've decided to change these 2 points in the roadmap.
My recollection isn't quite, you know.
I think it was exposed more than announced. I don't think they said we're calling a press conference to say we're changing the roadmap. Put it that way. And so, like, do you know why that happens? Why are those 2 points in this roadmap, which we're told for years and years is not going to change, why are they changed towards the end? Where's the pressure coming from?
Where is the pressure coming from? I mean, I think the pressure was coming from the sports movement to reinstate a country that was very well resourced and a very strong sporting nation.
Because Dick Pound, WADA's first president, he said that the reaction to Russia's reinstatement had all the elements of a lynch mob. So you're a part of the lynch mob.
Apparently.
Yeah. And he said there was ignorance of due process as well. Does he have a point there? Were we ignorant of some due process that Russia wasn't being afforded?
I'm not sure what he means by that.
Yeah, I'm not either. I've genuinely looked into it. David Howman, who was involved with WADA up until 2016, in broad terms, he said he feels they've gone from being an organisation that cared about clean athletes to one that cares about international federations that have not been able to stage events in Russia. It's money over principle. Would you agree that that's where we are?
I think there's been a shift, and it's been noticed by the athletes in particular, and I think that's why we're seeing such a surge of athlete voices in the landscape now, and the increased strength of athletes who are sort of wakening up to the notion that perhaps they are the ones who care the most about preserving integrity in sport and have the least conflicts, really, when it comes to sport.
I guess it's more straightforward to them.
It's more straightforward.
They want clean competition, they want to do their best, whereas WADA and the Olympic movement need to stage events, they need powerful federations, they need important people to give money.
And they need to keep politics out of it, and I think that's the heart of it for athletes, is that this shouldn't be about politics. This is very black and white. You're either on the right side of this or the wrong side of this, and to be in the middle and trying to negotiate both sides isn't going to work.
Yeah. And Becky, when you say you felt a shift over the last couple of years, can you expand on that or give us a sense of how you felt that shift?
In detail, I mean, I think it's... I think can I come back to that question?
Sure.
Think about it.
I'm going to write it down, though. You've been around WADA since about 2005?
Yes.
Is one of the reasons you got involved because, I mean, you had that awful experience. I think it's one of the worst experiences an athlete can have, whereby you finish third and then it turns out actually you're upgraded to first, so you're robbed of the moment of ecstasy.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very personal experience for me, being directly involved with doping, in that my Olympic medal,
That was at Salt Lake?
Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I won a bronze, and then it was upgraded to silver and subsequently gold, but over the next 2 years. So
I wasn't sure the timeline.
Yeah, it was about 2 years. So
when do you get told you're up to silver?
8 months after.
Okay. Letter in the post? Phone call?
I think it was a phone call.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
And is your reaction one of happiness or disgust or a strange mixture?
The silver medal was... I would say I was very, neutral on that. I didn't really want a silver medal.
It doesn't change your life, I guess.
It doesn't change my life, and it isn't really justice all the way. It was either, let's do this all the way or not at all. I think silver would have been a real halfway compromise.
And how long then until gold arrives?
Another 8 months.
8 months.
Yeah.
Another phone call?
Yeah. Yes.
And are you happier when that one arrives?
Yeah, I was. I was relieved at that point because I think it was a real unknown. The cases were going before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. There was resistance and there was appeals, and it actually wasn't going to be a clear-cut case. So there wasn't, I wasn't 100% sure that even though these two women had tested positive, that in fact the Olympic Committee would roll over the results and reallocate the medals. So I was relieved, actually, at the end of the day.
At the time of competing, on the day, around the week, in the build-up to the Salt Lake Games, were you suspicious of those two women?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely.
Why?
Yeah, I mean, doping was an open secret in our sport, in cross-country skiing. I would say it's as prolific and well-known as cycling. It's a problem, a big problem.
I didn't realise that, I must say.
Yeah, it is. Well, you might have heard of the recent drug raid in Austria at the Nordic World Championships, and that happens not regularly, but regularly enough that it's certainly it's a known problem in the sport. So when, as athletes, of course, you always know when performances seem too good to be true.
Okay.
And there was a lot of speculation, a lot of rumours, and certainly a number of positive tests. There had been one major drug bust leading up to those games in Finland. Virtually the entire Finnish team had been exposed for using drugs.
I read about that. Yeah.
So it's interesting because people ask me, were you surprised, that these two women had tested positive? I said, no, I was not surprised that they had been doping. I was surprised that they were caught, though.
Okay. Was it in the culture of your sport at the time to confront the women? I'm sure you crossed paths.
Not at all. No, like I said, it was an open secret. People talked about it behind closed doors, but never confronted or talked about it openly.
Okay.
No.
And why didn't you dope?
It was never an option. It was actually never a decision I had to make. It was never part of our team culture. It was never presented to me as an alternative. It was never, ever even considered at any point or at stage in my career. And that's from, being a little kid racing. And culturally, I think as well, it was, in a way, I was lucky because I was surrounded by people who would never, ever consider that and who really considered it a disgraceful behavior and disgraceful way to accomplish getting a result when sport is supposed to be about, honesty and integrity and equality and all these great things. To cheat that and to engage in behavior just to be successful or just to be more successful or improve your performance was just an absolute, non-thought.
How did you feel when you won third?
Actually really happy.
Really?
Yes.
I just, I can imagine standing on the podium and finding it very hard to bite my tongue.
Well, at that time, a medal for Canada in cross-country skiing was actually really a long shot. It had never happened before. Okay. So it was a bit of a historical milestone to actually win a medal at the Olympics for cross-country skiing. So a big part of that experience was just this incredible celebration that this glass ceiling had been shattered. Finally, North Americans could, consider themselves contenders for the podium at the Olympic Games. Within our team, of course, we were certain that those two women were doping. There was no question in our mind. So in a way, in the back of my head, and I was like, I have won the Olympics.
Do you hint at that in the media at the time when you're interviewed?
Yes, I did.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. Absolutely. Someone asked me a question, I believe, and I answered it honestly and said, I don't think. Well, I think it was more generally. It was about, do you think that the Olympics are clean? And I said, no, not at all.
So then you fast forward, and the Sochi Games happen.
Yeah.
And it's another 2-3 generations of athletes who are being robbed. Like, if WADA's reputation now is at an all-time low, I would suggest it is. It's been around since '99. I think there was a lot of hope for it initially. It seems to be on the back of the Russian decision at an all-time low, and there are other, maybe smaller controversies ongoing. What's the route forward? Like, how does WADA sort itself out? Does it have to separate from IOC funding? Does it have to have a complete root and branch reform? You've been in there a while, you have a feel for how it works. I don't.
Yeah, and I don't pretend to have all the answers.
Sure.
It is a really complex problem and issue, and I think one of the best places to start, though, is with the governance and to increase independence and increase athlete representation. And athletes are certainly knocking at the door and starting to demand it now with an urgency that I have never seen before. And I'm actually encouraged by that. I think it's a good thing. I think it's positive. And sometimes scandal like Sochi, it forces change, and it forces a reflection and a reset. And yeah.
And would that manifest itself with athletes on the board, or some kind of athletes union that has a say, or a handful of athletes involved in WADA? I don't know if that dramatically changes too much.
Yeah, well, I know
it's not a bad thing, but
I think the decision might have been very different if there had been 5 athletes voting at the table.
Were there any athletes on the executive committee?
Yes, there is one who sits there as the seat of the Olympic movement, so representing the Olympic movement.
Okay. A he or a she?
She.
And which way did she vote?
For reinstatement.
Okay.
There was only 2 that did not, and that was the representative from Norway and the one from New Zealand.
Okay, so the athlete representative did vote for reinstatement?
Well, it's not an athlete representative. It is a representative of the Olympic movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to a former athlete herself?
She's an athlete.
All right, okay. So...
But that's why I think we need independent athlete representation within WADA.
Okay. What about the level of testing? I was reading David Howman as well. He had a quote just this week, and he was saying, drug testing methods, they're still rooted in the 1970s. He said better technology is needed. He said we're still in a position where we're getting the same number of positive cases each year. Many of them are in the category of what I would call dopey dopers, as in they're just stupid. Was his point. And he says on urine tests, my worry is we only do it because it's a way to build up numbers. It's not the way to catch cheats. There's a misguided view that perhaps it's deterring people. Well, it's not. It's catching the stupid ones because they're just stupid, but it's not catching real cheats. Do you disagree with the wider sense that the testers, for a variety of reasons, are miles behind the dopers?
I think when I look at my own sport, cross-country skiing, and I look at the number of drug cheats that have been caught through testing versus investigations and drug raids and police work, it's no contest. It is clear that investigations and being able to tap into a network and being able to employ police and law enforcement officials in breaking open the big drug networks is the way to go.
Okay.
And we've seen, historically, even in the last number of years, the major revelations that have really resulted in massive exposure have been through whistleblowers. So I think that is clearly the most effective way we're dealing with doping and drugs use in sport right now.
And how commonplace is that?
I think it's becoming more commonplace, and we as an athlete committee just issued a statement as part of our outcomes from one of our last meetings that we really support countries that are employing and implementing legislative measures to enable the police and investigative work to do this sort of thing and to criminalize the activity.
Because today, sport, in Ireland, for instance, the findings of the last year were announced, and there were 1,112 tests carried out by Sport Ireland across 28 sports, and there was one adverse result, and that was a cannabis derivative. So there would have been a time where I think we were all a bit more naive, and you would have looked at that and said, well, geez, 1,000 plus tests and no positives, things are great. That's a good day. But I don't think anyone sees that really as a good result anymore, because statistically, that's improbable.
Yeah, well, but I also think that there's two ways to read that, and one, is on the other side. I think you can look to Sport Ireland and the Irish anti-doping organisation as a very robust, leading anti-doping organisation that's actually considered one of the better ones in the world. Right. So, and then being amongst the athletes today too, I got a very good sense and strong appreciation for the culture and the attitude of the athletes when it comes to doping. So I think that those kind of results are plausible. In fact, when you have, athletes who are competing with integrity, who clearly are interested in anti-doping and clean sport, and you combine that with a very strong, robust, and effective anti-doping organisation.
That said, the ones who are cheating are hardly likely to come up to you today and say, well, look, I'll be honest with you, Becky, I'm at it all the time and the results are great.
Yes, no, you got me there.
So are you going to be part of these workshops over the next 9 months, or is that just going to be an Irish-led thing?
It's an Irish-led initiative and an Irish-led project, but I certainly talked to Shane O'Connell, the chair of the Irish Athletes Committee, today about it, and I told him, as the WADA Athlete Committee, we're actually very interested in the feedback and the guidance that he's getting and the input from athletes that they're going to be gathering, so we're going to be in touch and continue communicating.
So do you think, WADA needs to, as we bring this to a close, does it need to almost completely start from scratch again, root and branch reform, maybe even a change in name, complete disassociation from the Olympic movement? Are things that drastic after this Russian decision?
No, I don't think so. I think there are many departments and many elements and branches of the organisation that are actually working very well and very effective, and there's a lot of very good people, experts, working within the organisation and every day for the cause. I think, again, where I come back to governance, I think that an increased level of independence and athlete representation will bring about a shift in priorities again. And
where would the funding come from?
I don't know.
Because that's one of the issues, that is one of the issues for testers, is financially trying to keep pace with the dopers.
Absolutely. It's an expensive endeavour. So, and we hear that a lot. And but I think, if we as a society, if we as the global sport community who so appreciate sport, who tap into sport all the time, if we want to be sure that we're watching legitimate sport, then there should be a mechanism that we're ready to pay for that and to ensure that it's well funded and resourced, because it's important and it should be a priority. And I think everybody recognizes it, that there's tremendous value in sport and powerful, elements of it that it can bring to all corners of the world. Yeah. And that in itself shouldn't be too expensive.
And are you confident that there are people around to instigate the change in governance that you're talking about?
I mean, I'm an optimist by nature, so I think that things will evolve. They have to.
Craig Reedy's term is up in 2 years. I've seen you mentioned in certain quarters as a potential successor. Is that something you're interested in?
So Craig Reedy and I finish at the same time at the end of this year. Both of our terms are done at the end of this year. And not really, no. I feel like I've spent a lot of time in anti-doping now. It's been 6 years as the chair of the Athlete Committee. And while I will always, maintain a connection, I think, to the Athlete Committee, mostly because many of them have become good friends. And I really am going to support them as much as I can from behind the scenes. I don't see myself stepping into the ring as no. And
are you going to get out of are you going to leave WADA altogether?
I will leave this post and leave WADA, yeah.
Right. Why?
Because my term is done, and I do think it's time to bring someone fresh and new into the role and take over. I think 6 years is a long time to be in this role, and I'm ready for a change.
To be bashing your head against a wall? Is that what we're saying?
That's That's one way to put it.
Yeah, okay. I'm sensing, we're reading between the lines here. That's disappointing because somebody who had the integrity to resign on principle over this Russian reinstatement is now leaving WADA at a time where it maybe needs to head more in that kind of direction is, I would think, going to be a loss. Is it because you're not confident WADA can be turned around in the short term?
No, it really is actually the timing, and my term is ending, but I am confident that the athlete committee that I'm leaving as, behind has the passion and the determination and equally as much integrity to carry on the work. And I know that because I rely on them very heavily for support and for work. They are engaged in all kinds of different projects and at all levels. And I actually, a lot of the decisions that I make that come up personally, because I am the chair and receive a lot of the attention and the spokesperson for the committee, I do very little without consulting them.
Yeah.
And so I know that they're going to continue to be strong, and they're going to continue to take their job representing athletes very seriously.
Yeah. And are they heard, though, by the executive committee?
Are they
listened to by the executive committee?
Well, that's the hope. We're going to keep pushing for a chair at the executive committee.
Okay. I don't speak to people from WADA very often. Is there any sense in there of what percentage of, say, athletes at a given Olympics are suspected to be doping?
The prevalence? I haven't heard that number, to be honest.
Okay.
No.
Because the numbers caught, even by urine tests in 2017, it's like 0.6%.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's very hard to give a percentage.
Yeah, it is very hard to put a number on it. And I mean, it's just because that people aren't getting caught by it through testing, and they're obviously not going to tell you if they are doping or not. So
unlikely.
It's a bit of a tough statistic to come by, I would think.
It is. That would tie in with David Howman's verdict. You'd have to be particularly dumb to get caught if they came up and told you. So what are you going to do with the rest of your time? What's next for you?
Well, I actually have a day job.
Okay, so, really? This isn't your full-time gig?
This is not my full-time gig. So I am the director of a charitable foundation for Indigenous communities and kids. It's Sport for Social Development. I often say I have one foot in the light side of sport and one foot in the dark side of sport. But I'll, return to that full-time. And, of course, I have my family as well. And we'll see what the future holds.
Okay. When did you notice the shift in WADA?
I think with Russia.
That was
the shift.
Okay. Listen, it's great to have you in and speak to you. I hope you enjoyed your time in Ireland. Becky Scott, thanks a million.
Thank you.